at these great stories of the Bible, and as I warned you last week, we were going to look at this Gadarene demoniac, or, as I said last week, they went hog wild and pig crazy. Right? And that's the story today. Now, we're going to jump back and forth, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then back again. I'll tell it to you, but you might, if you want to read it, you're going to have to jump real quick, because the reason I'm doing that is we take all three of the gospel writers that record this story, and not all of them record the whole story. So we're going to get the whole story by looking back and forth. We'll start with Matthew 8:28. When he came to the other side into the country of the Gadarenes, two men who were demon-possessed met him as they were coming out of the tombs. They were so extremely violent that no one could pass by that way. Then we'll go to Mark chapter 5 and the first two verses. They came to the other side of the sea and into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And then looking at Luke chapter 8, then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he came out onto the land, he was met by a man from the city who was possessed with demons, and who had not put on any clothing for a long time, and was not living in a house, but in the tombs. And then moving back to Mark, and he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, and gashing himself with stones. And then moving back to Matthew, and they cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" And then looking at Mark, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. In Luke it says it this way, seeing Jesus, he cried out and fell before him and said with a loud voice, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For it had seized him many times, and he was bound with chains and shackles and kept under guard, and yet he would break his bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They were imploring him not to command them to go away into the abyss. And then moving back to Matthew, now there was a herd of swine feeding at a distance from them. The demons began to entreat him, saying, "If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." And they came out and went into the swine, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. The herdsmen ran away and went to the city and reported everything, including what had happened to the demoniacs. And then in Mark it says it this way, "Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, 'Send us into the swine so that we may enter them.' Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them. And they were drowned in the sea. Their herdsmen ran away, reported it in the city and in the country. And the people came to see what it was that had happened." And then looking in Luke, it says, "Now there was a herd of many swine feeding on the mountain, and the demons implored him to permit them to enter the swine. And he gave them permission. And the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran away and reported it in the city and out in the country." And then Mark says, they came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. And then Luke says it this way, the people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it reported to them how the man who was demon-possessed had been made well. And then Matthew says, and behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they implored him to leave their region. They didn't want him around anymore. Mark says, and they began to implore him to leave the region. And he was getting into the boat, and the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him. But he said to him, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. Luke says it this way, and all the people of the country of the Gerasenes and the surrounding district asked him to leave them, for they were gripped with great fear, and got into a boat and returned. But the man from whom the demons had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him. But he sent him away, saying, return to your house and describe what great things God has done for you. So he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Well, like I say, I did not leave out any of the great gospel writers. But you see how each one gives you a little dynamic different here and there. Our last story was that parable of the sower. And you remember that Jesus had gone out on a boat in the Sea of Galilee because of the great crowd, and the people gathered on the seashore, and he stood on the boat, made a natural amphitheater, and he told several parables at this time. And when he was finished, if you read on in the Gospels, you see that when he was finished telling those parables, they got in the boat and they just took off across the sea to the other side, to the area that's called Decapolis, the 10 cities, if you're familiar with Greek, Deca meaning 10 and polis meaning city, 10 cities. They were the extreme eastern part of the Roman Empire. They were basically Greek cities, so these were not Jewish people. That's why they were raising hogs. You know, you might have wondered about that. Why did they have a herd of swine if they were Jewish people? That's unclean to them. But these were Greeks, Greco-Roman people. And so, but on the way across, this is where you have the story. It's about a 5-mile trip. And some of you going to Israel with me in February, we're going to be out there on a boat on Galilee. But it's about a 5-mile trip across where they were. And in the midst of that trip, there was a great storm. And you remember that story that Jesus was asleep. You know, and they said, how can you be asleep? We're about to go under here. And Jesus said, peace, be still. You know, calm the storm. That happened just before this incident. And so he gets to the other side, and as soon as he gets off the boat, he's confronted by 2 men. Now, I know you probably noticed when we're reading that Matthew calls it 2 men, and Mark and Luke just speak of the one, right? Well, this is not a conflict of stories. Remember, Matthew was there. Mark and Luke were not. That's John Mark and Luke, the physician. They were not apostles. Matthew was there. Matthew recalls that there were 2 of them there in the tomb. Probably later on the story just emphasized this one guy who got cleansed, who got saved. The one guy who was the worst of the 2. And that's why they only talk about them, and Matthew talks about the 2 guys. But don't worry about that. The story, the thoughts of the story, the truth of the story, the message of the story is intact. So, what you have here in this story is a demon-possessed man, and it gives us an illustration of a battle that is going on, a battle between good and evil, a battle between, literally, Jesus and Satan in this world. It's a battle that goes on in the lives of individuals like you and me. It's also a battle that goes on in society around us. There is this back and forth pull in a person, and it's at the center of everything because the person is what makes up society. And the more people go to one side or the other, it affects society in exactly the same way, whether it's a city or whether it's a nation. And I think there's some truths we can take home today to help us in our day and age to see the battle, to recognize the battle, and to fight the good battle if you are a follower of Jesus Christ. The first point I want you to note from this story is the more Satan takes control, the worse it gets for the individual. Now I want you to just know that's an absolute truth. Take, for example, extreme violence. They were so extreme, these two that were living in that tomb, and especially the one guy, they were so extremely violent that people could not pass that way. They couldn't even go to the tombs to visit their loved ones who had been buried there. They couldn't even pass by the road there. They were so violent. Have you noticed just how violent things are getting as we increasingly in America turn to evil? Have you noticed it? If you haven't been looking at the news, or you've been burying your head in the sand somewhere. Extreme conditions. The man had not put on clothing, it says, for a long time. He was not living in a house, he was living in the tombs. Now, later on in the story, and we'll come back to it, he had a house. Jesus told him to go back to his house, go back to his home. But he chose, in and of himself, the more Satan has control, the worse it gets for the individual. Have you noticed an increase of people in our society? I'm not talking about homeless who are forced to be homeless. I'm talking about homeless who have chosen to be homeless. More and more and more. Just extreme conditions, because this is where Satan drives people to be. Not to pleasant, not to good, to this extreme actions. It says no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. The demons, it says, had seized him many times, and even though he was shackled and under guard, he would break it all and it would drive him out into the desert. Have you noticed that people are becoming more and more extreme in their actions in our society? Extreme anguish. It says constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones. Have you noticed that we're getting more and more into self-hurting behavior, including cutting among our young people? The more Satan takes control, the worse the conditions are for the individual. And they don't even see it. Extreme torment. He cried out, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." Have you noticed that people are crying out against the truth? If you speak the truth, they react in great torment. It torments them. They don't want to hear it. They can't stand it. They clog their ears. They say, let's pass laws to keep people from telling us the truth. They want to silence the truth. Why? Because the truth puts them in torment. The more Satan takes control, the worse it gets for society. Why? Because individuals make up society. And the more people that are swayed by Satan and evil, the more society swings in that direction as well. For example, extreme disruption. They were so extremely violent, these two living in the tombs, that no one could pass by that way. In other words, they were shutting down the roads. They were shutting down the passage. That road that they're talking about is a road that circles around the Sea of Galilee. It goes through the Decapolis area. It goes around by Chorazim. It gets over to Galilee. It circles around. You follow that road either to go down the east side or the west side of the Jordan River, which puts you in modern-day Jordan or in modern-day Israel or Egypt, depending on which side of the river and the Dead Sea you're on. It was a major road. These guys were shutting it down. Nobody could pass by on that road. Commerce was disrupted. Have you noticed how that people today are just doing the same thing? They're rioting, they're shutting down highways, they're trying to stop commerce in various ways. Extreme disruption. Extreme loss of modesty. He had not put on clothing for a long time, didn't bother him one bit. That was not a society in which people went naked, by the way, Greek, Roman, or Jewish. There are differences in types of clothes, but they did not go naked. Have you noticed a lack of modesty in our day and age and people not even bothered by it one bit? Think nothing of it? Extreme antisocial behavior. He was not living in a house, but in the tombs. He constantly, night and day, was screaming among the tombs in the mountains. If you were in the town nearby, that would bother your sleep just a little bit. But extreme antisocial behavior, not able to get along with anybody, going, just doing everything in an abhorrent way, in a way that is different than what common society would expect. How bad can it get? It can get bad as that guy's on the screen up there. Yes, I know that he developed the society, but it was very much an antisocial society. A developed society. He wasn't so much as an individual not living with people, but he was a person that was so turned to evil that he turned a whole nation to be antisocial to every nation on the face of the earth. That's how far it can go. Did you see the presidential candidate who could not even speak because of the group screaming out and taking the microphone? Extreme antisocial behavior, not even letting presidential candidates speak. Extreme lawlessness. He was bound with chains and shackles and under guard, yet he would break the bonds and escape. What about today when not even the president will follow the law of the land? Yes, I said it. Because some of his presidential decisions, prerogatives, have been opposite of the Constitution of the United States of America. And no one has the backbone in Congress to stand up and to impeach him because he has broken the law. They have the right to, but they won't do it politically. Extreme loss of blessings is the end result for a society that goes more and more with the side of evil and Satan and anti-Christianity or anti-Christ. The Scripture says there's coming an Antichrist, but the spirit of Antichrist is already alive and well in the world. It is out there. Now, I'll give you time if you want to get that cartoon. I don't know why everybody says Obama is bad for small business. We're swamped. They're going out of business. Okay, all right. I just want to make sure you got that. It says of this guy, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine and the herd and rushed down the steep bank into the sea, 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. This was a major business for this Greek city, the raising of hogs. 2,000 hogs they lost. That was not a blessing for them. The more and more Satan takes control, the less and less the blessing. Are you telling me that we're in good shape in America today financially? Are we blessed of God like we could be? Anybody here want to make that argument? I don't think so. Have you noticed the lack of God's blessing on America today? Have you ever asked the question, why? The fact is, the more we go in Satan's way, the more Satan has control in the society, the worse that society is. All right. Now, the good news then. Because this story also teaches us about the good news. The more Jesus takes control, the better it gets for the individual. Extreme violence is replaced with extreme peace. When Jesus got out of the boat, this man immediately ran up to him and bowed before him. This man who, before, when everybody was passing by, he'd go out and attack them. Wouldn't even let them pass by. Now he bows down in front of him. When people come into the presence of Jesus, peace starts to reign. He is, after all, the Prince of Peace, is he not? Extreme conditions are replaced by normal. Normal. Yes, my friends, despite what everybody in America is saying today, or many, there is such a thing as normal. Right? And all these signs you see of, well, what's normal for you and what's normal, that all just means nobody's believing in absolute truth. If you believe in the absolute truth of God, there is normal. The people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found this man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed. At the end, Jesus told him, go home. Go home to your people. He told him, go back to your house. Yes, there is a normal. One of our presidential candidates, and I'm not endorsing anybody, by the way, I just think it's a wonderful story. His name's Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz's father left him and his mother. He found Christ and went back home to be an evangelist and pastor. His name's Rafael Cruz. He was doing well in the oil and energy business in Canada when he suddenly hopped a plane to Houston, leaving his wife and his son back in Canada in Calgary. Evidently, the stress of leading a family was more than he could handle. He abandoned Ted when he was age 3. With his wife and son left behind in Canada, Rafael lived alone in Houston. But dramatic events in the Lone Star State brought about a change in Raphael's heart. Galen Wiley invited Cruz to attend his church, a Baptist church, by the way. Raphael accepted the invitation, and later when Wiley delivered the mail to the Canadian, he was a bivocational pastor, Raphael accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord. Shortly after his visit to the Clay Road Baptist Church and decision to follow Christ, Raphael's heart was transformed. He decided he should and could be a family man. Raphael reunited with his family, but he didn't re-enter the oil and energy business. He also changed careers and became a preacher himself. When people come to Jesus, their conditions change, and it goes back to normal. Extreme actions are replaced by normal actions. The man from whom the demon had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him, that this would be a normal reaction. I want to go with you. You help me. When people come to Jesus, their actions become normal rather than abnormal. Extreme anguish is replaced by a sound mind. They came to Jesus and observed that this man who was demon-possessed was sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. Anguish and worry destroy a person's ability to think correctly. When people come to Jesus, they start thinking right. Extreme torment is replaced by a mission. Jesus said to him, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim this in all of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. When people come to Jesus, they're no longer tormented by the truth. They are preachers of the truth. The more Jesus takes control, the better it gets for society as well. Extreme disruption is replaced by peace instead. They could go visit their families. Extreme loss of modesty is replaced by decency. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed. He was sitting down. He had his clothes on. They didn't have to hide their kids from the vulgar display anymore. Those who follow Jesus are not indecent. They're decent. Extreme antisocial behavior is replaced by propriety. He went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis the great things that Jesus has done. His behavior was now acceptable. He didn't have to be locked up and shackled anymore. Those who follow Christ act appropriately. Extreme lawlessness is replaced by law-abiding. He now followed the laws of the land. Those who follow Christ are law-abiding. Extreme loss of blessing is replaced by extreme blessings. The next time you see Jesus coming to this Decapolis area is in Matthew 14, Mark 6. And in those you see that when they had crossed over and came to land at Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized him, They sent word into all the surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. Now I want you to notice the difference. Where did we leave off in this story? They said to Jesus after the pigs had gone in to sea, will you just please leave? Will you get out of here? We don't want you around here anymore. Now by the time he comes back to Decapolis, all the men of the area bring all the sick and all those in need and bring them to Jesus. Now I want you to think, what was the difference? Was it perhaps a certain demon-possessed man who had been delivered, who had been saved, who did what Jesus said and preached to all these 10 cities all that time until Jesus came back, and now they came out by the thousands to hear him. And they were extremely blessed. The deaf were hearing, the blind were seeing, the lame were walking. They heard the good news about the kingdom of God from Jesus himself. Now they were extremely blessed. Those who follow Christ are blessed, and so is their nation. Oh, the conclusion is simple. Come to Jesus. Bow at his feet. When he got out of that boat, immediately that man came and fell down before him. He came to Jesus. He recognized who Jesus was. That's what we must do. What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, he said. See, those demons even knew who Jesus was. Do business with Jesus. He says, what business do we have together? The phrase is, what am I to you and you to me, was a Hebrew phrase that means, are we going to do business here? Do business with Jesus. Recognize his power over evil. Jesus just said those demons, go, and they left. Recognize who he is. Obey him. When he wanted to go with Jesus, Jesus said, I know better. You need to stay here, go home, and preach to your people. Come to Jesus. Recognize who he is. What do you need to do today? Are you in torment? Are you in anguish? Is your life falling apart? You see, the more Satan gets control, the worse it will be for you. The more Jesus gets control, you know what I mean by control. Who's running the thing? Right? Who's behind the wheel? I know there's that country song, Jesus Take the Wheel, but I guess that's right, really. Because if you let Satan take the wheel, it's going to end up in a crash. And it may take your very life. So let me ask you today, who's in control? Wouldn't you like Jesus to be in control today? Let's stand together.